Men-at-Arms by Terry Pratchett. Corporal Carrot, Ankh-Morpork City Guard, Night Watch, sat down in his nightshirt, took up his pencil, sucked the end for a moment, and then wrote, "Dearest Mum and Dad, well, here is another fine turn-up for the books, for I have been made corporal. It means another $5 a month, plus, also, I have a new jerkin with 2 stripes upon it as well, and a new copper badge. It is a great responsibility. This is all because we have got new recruits because the patrician, who, as I have formally vouchsafed, is the ruler of the city, has agreed the watch must reflect the ethnic makeup of the city." Carrot paused for a moment and stared out of the small, dusty bedroom window at the early evening sunlight sidling across the river. Then he bent over the paper again. "Which I do not fully understand, but must have something to do with the Dwarf Grabpot Thundergus cosmetic factory. Also, Captain Vimes, of who I have often written to you of, is leaving the watch to get married and become a fine gentleman, and I'm sure we wish him all the best. He taught me all I know, apart from the things I taught myself. We are clubbing together to get him a surprise present. I thought one of those new watches that don't need demons to make them go, and we could inscribe on the back something like, 'A watch from your friends in the watch.' This is a pun or play on words. We do not know who will be the new captain. Sergeant Colin says he will resign if it's him. Corporal Nobbs." Carrot stared out of the window again, his big, honest forehead wrinkled with effort as he tried to think of something positive to say about Corporal Nobbs. "Corporal Nobbs is more suited in his current role, and I have not been in the watch long enough, so we shall just have to wait and see." It began as many things do, with a death and a burial, on a spring morning with mist on the ground so thick that it poured into the grave and the coffin was lowered into cloud. A small grayish mongrel, host to so many assorted doggy diseases that it was surrounded by a cloud of dust, watched impassively from the mound of earth. Various elderly female relatives cried, but Edward Dieth didn't cry, for 3 reasons. He was the eldest son, the 37th Lord Dieth, and it was not done for a Dieth to cry. He was, just, the diploma still had the crackle in it, an assassin, and assassins didn't cry at a death, otherwise they'd never be stopping. And he was angry. In fact, he was enraged at having to borrow money for this poor funeral, enraged at the weather, at this common cemetery, at the way the background noise of the city didn't change in any way, even on such an occasion as this, enraged at history. It was never meant to be like this. It shouldn't have been like this. He looked across the river to the brooding bulk of the palace, and his rage screwed itself up and became a lens. Edward had been sent to the Assassin's Guild because they had the best school for those whose social rank is rather higher than their intelligence. If he'd been trained as a fool, he'd have invented satire and made dangerous jokes about the patrician. If he'd been trained as a thief, but no gentleman would dream of being trained as a thief, he'd have broken into the palace and stolen something very valuable from the patrician. However, he'd been sent to the assassins. That afternoon, he sold what remained of the Dieth estates and enrolled again at the guild school for the postgraduate course. He got full marks, the first person in the history of the guild ever to do so. His seniors described him as a man to watch, and because there was something about him that made even assassins uneasy, preferably from a long way away. In the cemetery, the solitary gravedigger filled in the hole that was the last resting place of Dieth Sr. He became aware of what seemed to be thoughts in his head. They went something like this.
Any chance of a bone? No, sorry. Bad taste there. Forget I mentioned it. You've got beef sandwiches in your, lunchbox thingy, though. Why not give one to the nice little doggy over there?
The man leaned on his shovel and looked around. The gray mongrel was watching him intently. It said,
Woof.
It took Edward Dieth 5 months to find what he was looking for. The search was hampered by the fact that he did not know what he was looking for, only that he'd know it when he found it. Edward was a great believer in destiny. Such people often are. The Guild Library was one of the largest in the city. In certain specialized areas, it was the largest. These areas mainly had to do with the regrettably brevity of human life and the means of bringing it about. Edward spent a lot of time there, often at the top of a ladder, often surrounded by dust. He read every known work on armaments. He didn't know what he was looking for, and he found it in a note in the margin of an otherwise very dull and inaccurate treatise on the ballistics of crossbows. He copied it out, carefully. Edward spent a lot of time among history books as well. The Assassin's Guild was an association of gentlemen of breeding, and people like that regard the whole of recorded history as a kind of stockbook. There were a great many books in the Guild Library, and a whole portrait gallery of kings and queens, often with discreet plaques under them, modestly recording the name of the person who'd killed them. This was the Assassin's Portrait Gallery, after all. And Edward Dieth came to know their aristocratic faces better than he did his own. He spent his lunch hours there. It was said later that he came under bad influences at this stage, but the secret of the history of Edward Dieth was that he came under no outside influences at all, unless you count all those dead kings. He just came under the influence of himself. That's where people get it wrong. Individuals aren't naturally paid-up members of the human race except biologically. They need to be bounced around by the Brownian motion of society, which is a mechanism by which human beings constantly remind one another that they are, well, human beings. He was also spiraling inwards, as tends to happen in cases like this. He'd had no plan. He'd just retreated, as people do when they feel under attack, to a more defensible position, i.e. the past. And then something happened, which had the same effect on Edward as finding a plesiosaur in his goldfish pond would on a student of ancient reptiles. He'd stepped out, blinking in the sunlight one hot afternoon, after a day spent in the company of departed glory, and had seen the face of the past. Strolling by, nodding amiably to people. He hadn't been able to control himself. He'd said, "Hey, you! Who are you?" The past had said, "Corporal Carrot, sir. Night watch. Mr. Dieth, isn't it? Can I help you?" "What? No! Be about your business!" The past nodded and smiled at him, and strode on into the future. Carrot stopped staring at the wall. "I have expended $3 on an iconograph box, which is a thing with a brownie inside that paints pictures of things. This is all the rage these days. Please find enclosed pictures of my room and my friends in the watch. Nobby is the one making the humorous gesture, but he is a rough diamond and a good soul deep down." He stopped again. Carrot wrote home at least once a week. Dwarfs generally did. Carrot was 2 meters tall, but he'd been brought up as a dwarf, and then further up as a human. Literary endeavor did not come easily to him, but he persevered. The weather, he wrote, very slowly and carefully, continues very hot. Edward could not believe it. He checked the records. He double-checked. He asked questions, and because they were innocent enough questions, people gave him answers. And finally, he took a holiday in the Ramtops, where careful questioning led him to the dwarf mines around Copperhead, and thence to an otherwise unremarkable glade in a beech wood where, sure enough, a few minutes of patient digging unearthed traces of charcoal. He spent the whole day there. When he'd finished, carefully replacing the leaf mold as the sun went down, he was quite certain Ankh-Morpork had a king again. And this was right. And it was fate that had let Edward recognize this just when he'd got his plan. And it was right that it was fate. And the city would be saved from its ignoble present by its glorious past. He had the means, and he had the end, and so on. Edward's thoughts often ran like this. He could think in italics. Such people need watching, preferably from a safe distance. I was interested in your letter where you said people have been coming and asking about me. This is amazing. I have been here hardly 5 minutes, and already I am famous. I was very pleased to hear about the opening of number 7 shaft. I don't mind telling you that, although I am very happy here, I miss the good times back home. Sometimes, on my day off, I go and sit in the cellar and hit my head with an axe handle, but it is not the same. Hoping this finds you in good health, yours faithfully, your loving son, adopted, Carrot. He folded the letter up, inserted the iconographs, sealed it with a blob of candle wax pressed into place with his thumb, and put it in his pants pocket. Dwarf mail to the Ramtops was quite reliable. More and more dwarves were coming to work in the city. And because dwarves are very conscientious, many of them sent money home. This made dwarf mail just about as safe as anything, since their mail was closely guarded. Dwarves are very attached to gold. Any highwayman demanding your money or your life had better bring a folding chair and packed lunch and a book to read while the debate goes on. Then Carrot washed his face, donned his leather shirt and trousers and chainmail, buckled on his breastplate, and, with his helmet under his arm, stepped out cheerfully, ready to face whatever the future would bring.